very useful contribution. We now move to our final panellist, and that's Ian Coghill. And Ian, if you'd like to just introduce the topic from your particular standpoint.
And I'm Ian Coghill. I happen to be the chairman of the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, but I think I'm invited here because historically I've hunted, shot and fished, and I used to work quite hard at developing some of the arguments related to that at the time when there weren't many. If I could start off, unfortunately, by disagreeing with Dr. Lewis in his assertion that human beings are automatically more self-aware than animals. I've got 2 guns on my chute who are clearly less self-aware than almost any animal. One of them lacks self-awareness so much that he can't even stand in a straight line with everybody else, so it's not universal. The difficulty you've got with this subject is that when you start talking about the minutiae of killing and fear and stuff, you drift into an area where most people just switch off and run away. The reality is that if you are interested in humane control of wild animal populations, or indeed the humane treatment of domestic animals, you have to be interested in that. You don't become weird about it, but you should make those calculations in your own mind. I have, and I have over my life talked to many people who don't approve of hunting, shooting and fishing. Their normal reaction when you confront them with what they do, because very few of us, in fact I would argue no one, goes through life without inconveniencing, nor certainly killing large numbers of animals, is that they say, I don't want to talk about it, don't tell me, don't tell me, don't tell me. So when you say, as I did to a chairman of my committee once who wouldn't eat a pheasant because he thought eating a pheasant was cruel. He didn't say killing the pheasant, he thought eating the pheasant was cruel because the pheasant was a beautiful thing. I pointed out to him that he was about to go and have high tea at the council's expense eating halal chicken. The pheasant I could have given him would have been born at least 7 months before it was shot. If he'd been unfortunate, he could have been born 19 months before he was shot. In fact, he would have probably had a 19-monther, I've got to say. And it would have enjoyed a life in the wild, being looked after. It would take its chances and everything else, but it would have had a relatively happy life. It would have been flushed at random by one of my random beaters and slain by an unself-aware gun. His halal chicken lived 32 days in a shed, was stuffed into a plastic crate, rattled across England, hung upside down in a rack, and has had its throat cut by somebody saying that Allah is merciful. Now, if I was given the choice, and I'm being anthropomorphic here, I'd go for the bloody pheasant every time. So the difficulty is really twofold. The first is distance, and the other is hypocrisy. And I'm not talking about the paper, I'll come back to it in a moment, but essentially the vast majority of the human race in this country are so far removed from the reality of wildlife, or indeed domestic animals, that they haven't got a clue. Not a clue, that's the first problem. The second problem, that allows people to adopt positions which are mind-blowingly hypocritical. If you take the 3 things, hunting, shooting and fishing, that I've engaged in, I wouldn't say there's certainly no moral distinction between any of them. And I would argue there's no major difference between their humanity. But there's enormous difference in the way people feel about them. And that's to do with their relations. Virtually nobody in a city knows anybody that hunts. So if you say that a hunting person is a psychopathic, blood-sucking monster, they're quite as likely to go, is it? Oh really? Bastards, aren't they? If you say that a shooter is cruel, there's a remote possibility that they met somebody at a party that shot. And it might be a bit less difficult to persuade. If you make the same statement about fishing, they're almost certainly related to a fisherman. That's my Uncle Trevor you're talking about, isn't it? Do you mind? So the reality is more to do with what you're aware of than anything else. And I think that's a problem which will not go away. The classic example of the hypocrisy, I think, is was demonstrated by a film introduced by St David Attenborough. I was sitting watching my dinner, and it was about the life cycle of the wildebeest. Wildebeests are relatively abundant on the Serengeti Plain. They live for about 20 years. They eat grass. They do nothing interesting at all apart from mate. So you're going to have an hour filled with wildebeest. It starts off, Sir David is intoning the joys of this paradise that he's looking at. There's Mrs. Wildebeest giving birth to Master Wildebeest. Here's a scene in paradise, but wait, death lurks even here. And a bloody jackal is creeping up on this poor little bloody wildebeest, which it shortly kills. You then see a half-grown wildebeest, and Sir David says, you'd think they were safe by now, but no, a cheetah whacks one. Then you've got one that's nearly fully grown. A group of hyenas get that. Lions whack them. Leopards get them. Then you see them drowning in a river being eaten by bloody crocodiles. By the time it finished, I was in a state of shock, and my front room looked like a charnel house. I went to work the next day, and it was just that wonderful film on wildebeest. I said it wasn't on wildebeest, it was on wildebeest being killed in the most appalling fashion. So the next night I went back home, and there was a voice came on the news that said, viewers may be shocked by some of the scenes which follow. And it was a picture of somebody rabbiting. Well, there's a bit of a clash there, really. I mean, you know, there is this, the great mystery in life is why the bloody hell does a wildebeest ever go near the long grass? I mean, if they watched the television, then that was absolutely brilliant. And even worse, why do they go near television crews? I mean, if you see them, you know, it is fun. So, the other great example of hypocrisy, I think, is MPs. I've made a study of it. All the MPs that have voted against, that have introduced bills against hunting in Parliament, kept cats. Michael Foster had 2. Cats kill masses of stuff. I said to Mr. Foster once when I had a bag of hounds years ago, I had 30 hounds. And in the season we caught 15 brace. That's 1 hare per beagle. His cats averaged 1 bird or small mammal, most of them protected by law, a week. So, quite frankly, your animals are probably slightly worse than mine. Woman at work used to come in every day, virtually in tears, because Rascal, which is this giant ginger cat, had whacked another piece of protected wildlife. And she said, what can I do about it? I said, have you tried hanging a bell around its neck? She said, yes. And I said, how big's the bell? And she said, oh, about that big. I said, try one about £1.50. And when, in the end, I said, well, the best thing to do is to kill the cat. She said, I can't kill the cat. I said, don't tell me that, you will kill the cat. No, I won't. I said, look, you will, everybody kills their cat in the end. All you've got to do is bring it forward by 5 years, it's not a problem. So, the real difference between wild animals, can I just say that about the paper? This is, Gang Conservancy does science, and so this is a very useful and interesting review of science. It's not science, it's a review of science, and as such it's very interesting and useful and an addition to the debate. I don't necessarily agree with everything in it, but like other speakers, but it certainly takes things forward, which is very good. But the big difference between wild and tame is simply practical. If you decide to kill a dog, and you see, as soon as you start saying these things, as I said at the outset, you sound bloody weird. If you want to kill a dog, you say, come here, Tittles, get into the car, I'll take you down to the vets. He climbs in the car, you get out, you walk in the vets, you go, I'm not sure I like this place. You go, well, don't worry, you're only being castrated this time, we'll kill you in a few years' time. And so you go in, and he sits down, he gets an injection, it's all done. Try and do that to a fox. You walk up to a fox, say, excuse me, Mr. Well, you can't walk up to the belly thing in the first place, and you certainly can't give it. You have to use some sort of physical violence or some trick to get possession of it so you can do it. Classic example is shooting. You would be mad and probably locked up if you wanted to shoot a cow and you walked up to it and shot it in the heart and lungs, because there was a much quicker way of doing it. You can shoot it as you shoot a cow in a slaughterhouse, in the head, and it dies instantly. You would be equally mad to try and shoot a deer in the head. You shoot a deer in the heart and lungs, because if the bullet moves just a couple of inches in the wrong direction, you shot it in the jaw, it can gallop off, and you'll never see it again. So the fact is that in practice, whether we agree that they're different or not, there's a sound, practical reason for having to do things differently to wild animals than to tame ones. And the only other point I'd make is that cruelty is the infliction of unnecessary suffering. There are therefore 2 tests. Is it necessary? does it cause suffering. So the suffering it isn't absolute suffering because you couldn't kill anything, it has to be additional. None of the methods that have historically been used in this country to control pests or to collect animals for food fell into either of those categories. They were necessary either because you had to control the pest or because you wanted it to eat, and they were within the range of acceptability. None of them, whether it's shooting or hunting or whatever, or fishing, were extremely cruel. None of them. And none of them caused extreme suffering. And so we need to maintain the suite of options that we've got to control wild pests and to gather food for ourselves. Thank you.